On November 16th, 2020, Saul Phenduka made his first appearance on the podcast and chill with macg. And ever since, things have never been the same for the trio, which is macg, Saul, and the Ghost Lady. Puns have been flying around, and views alongside subscribers have been skyrocketing. I mean no disrespect to anyone I talk about in this video. This video is strictly for educational or entertainment purposes. Everything I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and have compiled it into one video. Saul Phenduka started off as a guinea pig just to taste waters in order for macg to have a new co-host, since his longtime friend Len was leaving the show. So basically, episode 202 was Saul Phenduka's interview. Beautiful chemistry was shared between him and macg, and chillers couldn't help but fall in love with it. Chillers were so impressed that they flooded the comment section and pleaded for Saul to become the permanent co-host. macg listened to his chillers like he always does, because remember,
this is not our show. Just public service announcement. This is the Chillers show.
Yes.
They are the shareholders.
The podcast and chill started getting more attention, not only through views and subscription, but sponsors started noticing them as well. Things, however, would not continue to be rosy. On the 25th of January 2021, just 2 months after Saul got one of his big breaks, Podcast and Chill was called into cancellation, and it ended up losing sponsorship from insurance company called Old Mutual. All of this transpired because of insensitive jokes made by Solomzi Phenduka towards the LGBTQI community. But surprisingly enough, though it was Saul that made those comments, it was not his head that was put on the chopping block. People called for macg since it was his platform and pretended not to know Saul, like Ayanda Tabete for instance. Well, for those who may have not known Saul Phenduka before Podcast and Chill, he was introduced to us on our television screens in 2014 on the Big Brother Mzansi show as one of the contestants. He also interned at YFM after receiving a bachelor's degree from the University of Johannesburg. He later joined 5FM on its new breakfast show at the time with DJ Fresh on Fresh at 5. Saul Phenduka prides himself about having an eye for good music, and this led to a release of 2 singles in 2010 and 2011. He was suspended at 5FM, however, and this suspension launched one of Africa's favorite co-hosts in the podcast industry, and macg named them Radio Rejects, saying that he also had been fired from radio.
We're having YFM rejects.
As more and more South Africans seem to be glued to their screens every single Monday at 3 p.m., the more Saul Phenduka grew in popularity. The once gambling addict became South Africa's personality sensation, causing him to land DJing gigs left, right, and center, and a television gig on SABC1. macg called it Soul Season because Mr. Phenduka was booked and busy. The celebration of Soul Season was not long-lived though, after Saul had accepted a contract deal from Kaya FM in July 2022 to become Dinewra Naka's supporting co-host. Chillers were livid. They didn't fail to express their feelings on the Twitter streets as well as the Podcast and Chill comment section. Soul Season became Villain Season, and another person that did not waste time in sharing their opinion was Nota Baloyi. He was brutally honest and went as far as calling Saul a sellout. macg decided to address the matter on the upcoming episode, which was episode 367. Him and Saul put the matter at rest, letting the chillers know that Saul was not leaving the podcast for Kaya FM. macg stated that he was fine with Saul accepting the contract, regardless of his feelings towards mainstream radio. Saul was not impressed with Nota's comments though, to the point where he would not address him by his government name, but called him Berita's ex-husband.
I'm saying
That's all.
Berita's ex-husband. I don't want to mention the name.
Things seemed to settle down a bit, but that didn't last for too long. Saul made his first appearance on the mainstream radio alongside Dineo Ranaka, and chillers were not impressed. They didn't think that the duo were the best fit, and there was no chemistry. Chillers preferred Saul on Podcast and Chill because that's where his personality shined brighter. Basically, they were saying that Saul Phenduka worked best with macg. Instead of things getting better for Saul on Kaya, he only trended on Twitter day in and day out. In fact, one thing that the viewers of Kaya FM noticed was that how Dineo Ranaka overpowered Saul Phenduka. They mentioned how Saul couldn't get a word in whenever they had a guest on the show, and how Saul would raise his hand if he wanted to speak, as though he needed permission from Dineo. This caused such an uproar that the listeners ended up writing an open letter to Kaya FM. But none of this broke Saul's spirit. Instead, he landed a gig where he would be on the panel of the roast of Kanyambao. As excited as the chillers were about having Saul Phenduka on a comedy show, they were quickly disappointed by his performance. Chiller stated that his jokes did not land and probably he is not as good or funny as they thought. Probably Saul Phenduka cannot perform at his best without his sidekick macg. But can macg perform at his best without Saul? On the 19th of September 2022, episode 392, Saul Phenduka sadly fell sick. This caused him to miss his first time ever episode on Podcast and Chill since he started back in November 2020. His position was temporarily filled by the comedian Mpho Pops, and he left viewers in stitches from laughter. This episode is currently the most viewed episode apart from celebrity interviews. Even macg brought his best foot forward with dropping puns. We can say he successfully channeled Saul's spirit. But I ask again, does macg need Saul to perform his best like people claim for Saul to need macg?
You got big shoes to fill there, literally. Because he's probably the hardest working person. Him and Robert Boy, they're fighting for that title. Hardest working. Don't forget, you might go to a pageant and he's emceeing. Stage 6, someone like stage 6 of the moon. Not load shedding.
Yeah, not load shedding.
Saul Phenduka is undoubtedly one intelligent individual with an amazing and lovable personality. Podcast and Chill has grew immensely after he joined, not only nationally but worldwide. Views changed from a couple of thousands per episode to close to 500,000 per episode. He's an amazing broadcaster, but does macg need him as much as it appears for him to need macg?